As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So a senior Air Force leader, a whistleblower, said in a letter to Congress that the Biden administration's refusal to withdraw from Niger, despite an order from the post-coup government to leave, has put U.S. troops in the country and in the region in danger. So this whistleblower said that senior officials at the U.S. Embassy in Niger have intentionally suppressed intelligence to maintain the facade of a great country-to-country relationship, as the U.S. is trying to figure out a way to maintain its military presence in Niger. The Nigerian government, known as the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, said in March that it was severing military relations with the U.S. and that the U.S. presence was no longer legally justified. U.S. officials have claimed that they did not receive an order to exit the country. So this whistleblower said, quote, "It is clear that the country of Niger does not want a permanent military presence in the country, and they have informed us that we need to leave. At the same time, there are approximately 1,100 U.S. military service members in the country who are essentially being held hostage from returning home to their families, while the State Department continues with failed diplomacy by not communicating with the country of Niger on what their withdrawal plans will look like," end quote. And this letter was obtained by the Washington Post. So if you remember, there was a story I covered recently where Niger held talks with the U.S., and the Nigerian officials came out and said that the U.S. will soon submit a plan to disengage troops from Niger. Then when U.S. officials were asked about it, they refused to comment on the talks, and they did not confirm what Niger said. So something seemed a little funny there. And what he's saying is that they're not communicating with Niger on their withdrawal plan. So it seems like they're just trying to stall in kind of a desperate effort to stay in Niger. So since the July coup that ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, U.S. troops in Niger have been on orders to sit and hold. The whistleblower said that U.S. personnel have had their deployments extended because Niger is not approving new visas for troop rotations. The airman said that all U.S. forces were scheduled to end a 6-month deployment early this month when relief forces arrived, but they never got there. Representative Matt Gaetz, a Republican from Florida, there was a congressional hearing on this on Tuesday, and Gaetz said that he spoke with U.S. Army soldiers in Niger and described similar accounts. He said, quote, "There are Army soldiers right now in Niger who are not getting their troop rotations, who aren't getting their medicine, who aren't getting their supplies, who aren't getting their mail," end quote. The whistleblower said that the U.S. actions in Niger, quote, "have potential implications for our bilateral relations with other partner nations and the safety of our personnel in the region," end quote. So a pretty crazy situation, it sounds like. Since the coup, the U.S. troops in the country have been on what they call a sit and hold order. They haven't been going out and doing any operations. They're just stuck at these bases, and they can't go home, even though the country they're in doesn't want them there. And this whistleblower was based at Airbase 101, which is in Niamey, the capital of Niger, or it's probably outside the city. But most U.S. personnel are stationed at Airbase 201, which is the big drone base that costs over $100 million to build. That's the big thing the U.S. doesn't want to give up. So that's what this is all about. And the fact that they're just kind of playing this game and lying and saying, oh, we haven't been told to leave, and probably doing what they can. I mean, it definitely puts the Americans who are there at risk. Being in a country, there's only 1,000 of them or so, and they're in a country that doesn't want them there. So following a meeting between President Biden and Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, there's no sign that a U.S. withdrawal from Iraq will happen anytime soon, despite earlier calls from al-Sudani's government for an end to the presence. So Biden and al-Sudani met in Washington on Monday and released a statement reaffirming the U.S.-Iraqi military partnership. The statement said they would continue talks on the future of the U.S.-led coalition in Iraq, but the next meeting is not until July. The U.S. has about 2,500 troops in Iraq as part of an anti-ISIS coalition that formed in 2014. Al-Sudani has previously said that Iraq can handle the ISIS remnants that are in the country without the foreign coalition, but the U.S. is insisting on a long, drawn-out process to evaluate the threat of ISIS. And both sides appear to be leaving open the possibility of a continued U.S. presence in Iraq, even if the anti-ISIS coalition ends its mission in the form of a bilateral partnership. Biden and al-Sudani said in a statement together, quote, "The two leaders affirmed they would review these factors to determine when and how the mission of the global coalition in Iraq would end and transition in an orderly manner to enduring bilateral security partnerships," end quote. So they're saying they're going to transition to an enduring bilateral security partnership, which sounds like the U.S. troops might stay. So ahead of his visit to Washington, al-Sudani wrote an article in Foreign Affairs where he called for a new kind of partnership with the U.S. He said in that article that there has been an agreement to end the international coalition in a gradual and orderly manner. I don't think there has been an agreement, really. Doesn't seem like the U.S. has agreed to that yet. But he's saying that this committee that's going to hold these talks will develop a roadmap for future relations, including the presence of U.S. advisors. So again, leaving open this possibility. And al-Sudani began calling for an end to the U.S. presence a few months ago when the U.S. was bombing the Shia militias in retaliation for the rocket attacks on U.S. bases, which that started because of U.S. support of Israel and Gaza. So the whole situation was a mess. Al-Sudani said, you got to leave. And the U.S. said, no, let's talk, let's start this whole long drawn-out process. Tensions have eased in Iraq as al-Sudani's government and Iran both convinced the Shia militias to stop attacking the U.S. after those 3 American troops were killed at Tower 22 in Jordan.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Massive U.S. deficit poses significant risk to world economy, warns IMF. Son of a bitch. Oh, the International Mafia Federation, Monetary Fund warns it. Oh, we only been warning it for how long? March home sales dropped despite a surge in supply. You got mortgage rates now, they're almost at 7.5%. But you know what? Even though sales are going down, as we had forecast in the Trends Journal, housing prices wouldn't. And more supply did not cool home prices. The median price of an existing home sold in March at $393,500, up 4.8% from the year before. Again, while everybody said this thing was going to bust when the mortgage rates went up, in the Trends Journal, we said, nope, no way, no how. This is for real this time. This is not like when the phony subprime mortgages back in the 2000s. When, you don't have a job, you're deep in debt, don't worry about it. Sign over here. Okay, you ready? We're in the Wall Street Journal today. Tech giants trim office space, dealing landlords major blow. Yeah, how about blow job? No fucking shit. Oh, what's one of your top trends? Office building bust. What's one of your top trends for 2024? Banks go bust. Hardly a word in it, and they play it down. They play it down. Oh, you ready for this? Buried at the bottom of the article. San Francisco office vacancy rate hit a record 36.2% in the first quarter, according to CBRE. You know what it was before the COVID war? 3.6%. As we said, the damage of this COVID war is incalculable. Financially, physically, mentally, spiritually. Oh, you like all those migrants coming over? Yeah. Thank the COVID war. Made a very bad situation worse. And it keeps getting worse. There's going to be a banking crisis. Here's an article yesterday, from Reuters. U.S. regional banks see booking more commercial property losses and loan sales. Yep. But don't worry about it. This is a slow wreck, not a high-speed crash, said Begar at Argus Research. Yeah. Analysts, however, do not expect turmoil from the banking sector's exposure to commercial real estate. Right there. Don't worry about it. Just stay in the markets. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. You got a 36% vacancy rate over there. You got a 23% vacancy rate in New York. You got a 29% vacancy rate in Portland, Oregon. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. Oh, Salenti, you are so negative. This thing's going to go down big. Gold has a real possibility to hit $3,000 an ounce or more this year. Rents are still rising, fueling inflation. Global economy to slow down in coming years, says the International Monetary Fund. This is a very important article. This is a critical article, and the reason I'm so angry is because we're on the verge of nuclear annihilation. These wars are not going to stop. We have maniacal, demonic people in control. U.S. President Joe Biden called on Congress to immediately pass an aid package for Israel and Ukraine. In an op-ed published in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. You ready? While both Israel and Ukraine can capably defend their own sovereignty, they depend on American assistance, including weaponry to do it. And this is the pivotal moment. The government of Iran wants to destroy Israel forever, wiping the world's only Jewish state off the map. The Jewish state that was invented by the Balfour Declaration in 1917 that we've detailed. The Jewish state, the United Nations, created by the United States, basically in 1945, with only 56 members, invented the state of Israel. The state of Israel, after 75 years, has been committing genocide and stealing land from the Palestinians. The government of Iran wants to destroy Israel forever, right? Okay, go on. And he goes on to say, after years of backing Hezbollah, Hamas, and other proxies in their attacks on Israel, including Hamas's brutal attack on October 7th, Iran launched a direct attack of its own. If Iran succeeds, it's significantly escalating its assault on Israel. The U.S. could be drawn in. Isn't that nice? Now let's go back to this. Iran said they had no knowledge of what went on October 7th. But it's okay for Israel to bomb the shit out of Iran anytime they want, blowing up their oil fields, blowing up their oil depots, killing people anytime they want, blowing up a consulate. But those lousy Iranians attacking the attacker, how dare they? Payback's a bitch, Biden. He goes on, Israel is our strongest partner in the Middle East. Wait a minute. If they're our strongest partner, why are we giving them money? They're stronger than us. And why do we need a partner in the Middle East? And what the fuck are we doing over there? We're still in Iraq. You destroyed Syria. You destroyed Libya, the richest country in Africa. Our ally in the Middle East who helps us murder and kill. Where's the outrage? Oh, why don't you donate to Occupy Peace? We're the billionaires. How come no money for Occupy Peace? Because we're billionaires. We could give a fuck about peace.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
At one point you were talking about, we'll get to Europe in a minute, but you were talking about comparing states within the United States, and you gave the example of Vermont. You gave the example of New Hampshire itself, where the debate was held, as examples of places with relatively high gun ownership rates and yet low murder rates. And people will say, well, you shouldn't have been surprised. Well, I was a little bit surprised when his initial response to you was, well, there are fewer people in Vermont. Like he thought you were talking raw numbers, and you immediately said, no, this is per capita. So therefore, he thought that this just had to be a raw numbers question. But now that you corrected him, no, it's per capita. What's his response? You know, I mean, is he genuinely unfamiliar with the numbers is the question.
I believe he is. He's not unfamiliar with the numbers. He's familiar with the wrong numbers. So here's what the gun control side does. You'll notice they always say gun violence. Gun violence is 5 things. Suicides, which make up 2/3 and growing of the share of gun violence. As all of the other forms of gun violence continue to drop and suicides, after many years of dropping, has started rising, it's making up a bigger and bigger share. It's the only reason that gun violence is rising, because everything else is dropping. So you got suicides, you've got homicides, which for decades have been on a long-term trend of dropping. You have justified killings, which as the crime rate drops, so does the correlating rate of justified killings. You have police killings, which also tends to rise and fall with the crime rate. The crime rate's going down, so police killings are going down. And then you have accidents, which have dropped by around 90% over just the last 40 years, at a time when licensing is at its all-time lowest, proving that licensing never made us more safe from gun accidents. But all of those are dropping. Accidents are becoming a non-factor at this point. It's suicides. This is a suicide problem. So what they'll do is they'll use the, thankfully, very rare instances of mass shootings, and then they'll couple that with a graph saying gun violence is on the rise. No, suicide is on the rise. When people think gun violence, they think murder. Murder has been dropping for years as the rates of gun ownership have continued to go up, as the number of restrictions, the net number of restrictions on our ability to own guns has gone down, proving that this is not a gun problem. Gun violence is a suicide problem. It is not a murder problem. It is just the only thing that's going up is suicides. So we're facing a mental health issue. People are feeling increasingly hopeless. That's not a gun problem.
But I think, if I remember this correctly, Hogg was trying to make the case that even though, yes, obviously you do need to disaggregate the data and understand that this is not all me pointing a gun at somebody and killing them.
Correct.
But the thing is that there are a lot of ways where somebody could attempt suicide, and given how effective guns are, whereas other methods might not be as effective, I might fail at it some other way and live to tell the tale. Whereas if I have a gun, I might actually be more successful.
Yes, and that's true. But that's like blaming murders on guns. You have to focus on why people are doing it, not blaming the tool. Yes, often if someone truly is trying to end their life and not just it's a cry for help or something like that, they're going to try to use the most effective tool. Just like if you want to murder someone, you're more likely to try to use the most effective tool. You don't blame the tool. you look at why someone reached a point of saying, I want to do this, and then you focus on that. Because yes, they're going to use the most effective tool, but even if you were somehow able to magically remove the tool, they're still going to do it. They'll just do it another way. We actually have proof of this. The only data that anyone has been able to present to prove that red flag laws work is a couple of studies that showed that it reduced the gun suicide rate. It didn't reduce the suicide rate, it reduced the gun suicide rate. In other words, someone was demonstrating to their loved ones that they might be wanting to kill themselves. They red flagged them. They came in, they took their guns, and they still killed themselves. It's not a gun problem. It is a mental health problem. Yes, they will use the most effective tool available if they truly do want to end it, but we need to focus on the fact that they want to end it, not how they're choosing to do so.
His point was, we have to have some sensible restrictions on the Second Amendment because, because your rights aren't absolute. And this one might be a little tricky because, radical libertarians, as you well know, Spike, have argued for some time about, can I have my own nuke and this and that? So there's nobody around. We're all friends here. Where do you come down on that issue?
Yeah, let's talk about the nuke thing. There's only one organization that wants the ability to commit mass murder, and it's the government. I want to be very clear about something. The reason that the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses and Bill Gates of the world, who frankly are the only people that actually have the means to own and maintain a nuke. Like that, this is not something, it's not if we said nukes are legal, there would be nukes are us. We're talking billions of dollars that have to be invested in developing, creating, and maintaining nuclear weapons. And the reason that these individuals, these handful of individuals that could afford the means to have a nuke, don't have one, isn't because there's a law that says you can't have them. I mean, there was a literal pedophile island. There's nothing stopping the wealthy and powerful from having nukes if they want them. They don't want them because what the hell would you want a mass murder machine for? The only organization or entity that has any reason to want the ability to indiscriminately massacre an entire section of the planet is the government. The reason that our nuclear production was focused so heavily on creating byproduct, which could be used to develop weapons instead of focusing on the energy creation aspect, was because it was the government that was directing how the nuclear energy output was being done. This is a government problem. And it is something to be said that whenever we're talking about gun control, we are essentially saying guns are dangerous. We can't trust individuals. No rights are absolute. We should be restricting it. And so we should put in charge the only entity who ever discusses or wants the ability to be able to destroy an entire section of the planet with nuclear weapons. It is actually the biggest argument, or one of the strongest arguments against gun control, is that we'd be putting it in the hands of the people who have both the means and the only ones who have the desire to have the ability to commit that kind of mass murder to begin with.
As Judge Andrew Napolitano points out, the Constitution requires probable cause of a crime to be demonstrated to a judge before a judge grants a warrant. That was the law of the land until FISA. But now FISA has set up a special court that meets in secret, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and it authorizes judges on that court to issue search warrants based on a lower standard of probable cause. The Fourth Amendment says you have to prove to a judge probable cause of a crime. This says you only have to prove probable cause of an association with a foreign entity. This is contrary to the Constitution. This is not the Fourth Amendment. The Constitution requires that warrants be issued on probable cause that a crime has been committed. But as Judge Napolitano makes clear, FISA established probable cause of foreign agency. So he lowered the standard, and it's not probable cause of a crime, but it's probable cause of association with a foreign agency. But even that standard morphed down into probable cause of speaking to a foreign person, which then again morphed even further down to probable cause of speaking to any person who has ever spoken to a foreign person. All of that happened in secret and without congressional approval.
You think the Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Democrats as well, who voted against Andy Biggs's amendment and Chip Roy's amendment to require a search warrant, even understand what you're saying? Do they care, or are they terrified and intimidated by the deep state, by the spies who share secrets with them?
It's usually scaremongering that gets them in the end. See, Johnson's inclinations at first were to be more on our side. Yes. He had historically actually had doubts about FISA. He had historically thought a warrant was a reasonable thing until they take him into a secret room and they say the end of the world is coming and here's the secret data that we only give to the overlords, and you're a special overlord now. We're going to show you the keys to the kingdom, what would happen if we don't do anything. And it's scaremongering. And they're very effective at it because, see, they control all of the data. So if I take you into a secret room and I say, well, this attack was thwarted, and this attack was thwarted, and this attack was thwarted, and it wouldn't have been without 702, we have no way of investigating that because they have all of the data. They won't allow you to have staff in the room. They control the flow of data to you, and their purpose is to defend and protect their power. And so this is what's happened. But if you were to ask the American people, should an American have their information revealed without going to a public court of law, to an Article 3 judge, to having a lawyer on your side? Most Americans would say no. This used to be just sort of a libertarian issue, and we'd get killed on every vote. So it was actually a big success to get to a tie vote. We lost, disappointingly, but 10 years ago, we would have gotten 50 or 60 votes in the House. So there is more outrage, and some of this came from Donald Trump because he was a popular main candidate for a main party, and people saw that FISA was used against him.
Right.
Now, he's been somewhat erratic on it. He has opposed it and railed against it, and then he approved it. I can still remember the day when FISA was approved the last time with Trump in office, because I had been on television that morning condemning it. He calls me up and says, I'm with you, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to stop it. And an hour later, Paul Ryan and a bunch of generals are in his office telling him the world will end, and then he reversed course and he, reauthorized FISA. But there's going to be a fight in the Senate. I do predict that we'll lose. This is something that Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer love this, the idea of spying on Americans. They go along with, the world will end. And, my response to them is, and the media comes up to me breathless, and it's like, what will happen on midnight if this expires? And I usually look at them calmly and say, well, couldn't we survive on the Constitution just for like a day or two?
Right.
And, they're flabbergasted. And most of them don't realize this, that before 1978, there was no FISA, and we still spied on foreigners. In fact, I don't think there's a statutory or constitutional reason why you can't spy on foreigners. We have the technological ability through our defense agencies and through our intelligence to collect every phone call in Libya if we want to. If that's international defense, I don't think there's anything constitutionally stopping that. But if those people are talking to Americans, we don't have the right to put in Americans into that database and search them at all. So this is while I'm for the warrant requirement, in some ways I'm not really for any search of Americans. I'll have a competing amendment that I'll put forward that says you can't search Americans with or without a warrant because the data you're looking at has been collected in an unconstitutional manner.
Correct.
Now,
you truly are the greatest understander of the Constitution in the Senate today. And
so I, for one, think that the American people are opposed to this bill. I think they're opposed to the concept of Ukraine first and America last. And I predict that this issue doesn't go away. I predict that the House of Representatives is not going to take up this bill. I predict that the vast majority of the Republicans in the House of Representatives are more conservative than the Republicans in this body. And I predict that this fight is not over.
What do you think will happen now?
My prediction could be wrong. I hope I'm still right, but I do think that the Republicans in the House are more conservative than the Republicans in the Senate, and there's still a chance that it could be delayed. But we now have Speaker Johnson disappointing me to my very core. I mean, he started out at least saying that foreign aid should be paid for, and that would be a big step forward. And he's backing away from that. Now he's talking about passing all of the foreign aid unpaid for. And it really doesn't seem to be much difference between his position and Joe Biden's or his positions and Mitch McConnell's. And so if he's craving the polling numbers of Mitch McConnell, he'll get them. Mitch McConnell's popular with about 6% of Americans, unpopular with about 60% of Americans. And that's where Johnson is headed at this point. The question is, will he be able to ram this through? Probably. But people at home need to realize what Mike Johnson has now done as Speaker. He passed a spending bill with the majority Democrats. Majority Republicans voted against his spending bill. That spending bill will lead to a deficit this year of at least $1.5 trillion. Then Mike Johnson came forward and voted with the majority of Democrats against a warrant requirement to search Americans. And now he's going to come forward once again with a majority of Democrats and vote for foreign aid to everybody. $60 billion more to Ukraine. I saw one report that's going to be over $20 billion now to Israel, and then unpaid for, and then more for Taiwan. And then they're going to ban, TikTok. Everything under the sun they can do, they're going to do wrong coming forward. And it's all Mike Johnson. So I've run out of patience with trying to not be too harsh on him, because I'm letting the world know now that he's no better than Hakeem Jeffries. And it's not even worth voting for Republicans for the House if that's what they're going to do to you. He's completely abdicated the power of the purse. He's not doing anything to defend our country. He's working with Joe Biden. And that to me is just a miserable, miserable mistake.
A lot of dumb things going on in Congress and around the world and our foreign policy, all the way from the beginning of our university system and our government school system all the way up. It's been conditioned, and we're seeing the results, and they're all around us, economically speaking, and our assumption that we are to rule the world. But this time, Biden was very specific, triple the tariffs on China, and this will hasten today. So it's a political stunt. It has nothing to do with economics. If they were looking at economics, they said, this is crazy. This is raising the prices on goods and services, and I'll bet you there's a lot. And at the same time, everybody's against the inflation, but they don't want to understand it. Now, when the prices go up due to tariff, that literally is not inflation. That pushes prices up. But just prices going up isn't the inflation. But the inflation comes from, the devaluation of the dollar when the dollar becomes less. But this is energy to that. This is like throwing gasoline on it. There's a motive to raise all prices, and that has a long way to go before that's ironed out. So they come along and they put on the tariff tariffs, and that's going to add to the problem. And people will recognize this not as a tax. It comes from the fact that there are deficits out there, and that's how they pay for this deficit. So I suggest that all people watch this closely, and if they see what their members of Congress are doing and whether they're voting for this stuff, it's something that's worth looking into. It is a tax, an additional tax, and we don't need any of that. We need the reduction of taxes. The ultimate goal, of course, is get rid of the income tax, and we would all survive much better. Why don't they just have up and down votes?
Yeah.
Let the chips fall where they may. Why switch around and sell out and then still lose? Lose both. And right now, there's almost a tradition that locks the politician in, and this happens on both sides. The whole thing is to pass it, just pass it, and it's an obsession with them, and that's the only objective they have is just to pass the bill. What it does and what it doesn't do doesn't even seem to matter. But if you have an up and down vote and you lose by 10%, or if you lose by 1 vote, I would think that you shouldn't give up. Oh, we can't have that happen. It's passing the vote that is so critical. And they say, well, what else can you do if it's important? Don't you care if they pass a bill to cut some spending? Yes, but I would let the chips fall where it may, and let the people who they represent decide whether or not they should vote one way or the other.
Yeah, that would simplify it. But Johnson's on this kick. He said the other day, if we don't pass this money for Ukraine, Russia's not going to stop at Ukraine. It's going to take over Europe. And I would say, what is your evidence for that? What would they do once they took over Europe? What are they going to do? Is they sit down and have a coffee? I mean, it's just so absurd on his face. And no journalist ever asked him, well, Speaker Johnson, what is your evidence for that they're intent on taking over Europe? And what would they do with Europe? They're already the biggest country in the world with the most resources in the world. What are they going to do? So it's just so absurd. Washington Post literally came out with an op-ed today saying, here are the U.S. congressional districts benefiting from Ukraine aid. So what? Wait, hold on. I thought that was aid for Ukraine. No, it's all out on the open. This is corporate welfare that will be benefited across many congressional districts. That's what it's all about. It's about spending to prop up the military-industrial complex here. It's not for Ukraine.
Boy, that's for sure. So a picture is worth a lot of value to see what's going on. And of course, we've been making that statement, but when you see that map, but we've said this about it. The way they build weaponry, they pass out the contract. So these are contracts usually, but it's always this pretense. And okay, we're going to make the world safe for NATO, and they talk people into it because it's still rather sacred not to criticize NATO.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a little bit more tolerance of that, but just think of the abuse of the principle of NATO. Robert Taft knew what he was talking about from the beginning. Watch out, don't even get involved. That will involve us for a long time.
Yeah.
And we're deeply involved.
Op-ed, it appeared in Real Clear Wire. And it's by, I don't know if you remember the member Bob Goodlatte from Virginia. He seemed like a decent fellow, as I remember.
Yeah.
Quiet, not a loud mouth, but he wrote a great op-ed. And if we can put it up here, Senate can stop expansion of government surveillance is the name of the op-ed, and he wrote it with Mark Udall. He was also in the House, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a good article. Go to the next one now. Here's what he talks about. He says, when the U.S. House passed the Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act, which reauthorizes FISA's Section 702 surveillance, it overlooked something, an amendment that would drive the greatest expansion of government surveillance authority in recent history. And we warned about this yesterday, and he called it, turn it to the next one, everyone's a spy provision, which, as we mentioned yesterday, Dr. Paul, basically it means the government can press into service any American. If you're in a hotel and you're using their Wi-Fi, they can go to the hotel and say, we need all the information from Dr. Paul's telephone, everything he did while he was here. And it's not just that. Everywhere you go where you use a Wi-Fi. We talked about yesterday, your plumber, your gardener, they could go and say, we need you to spy for us against Dr. Paul, and you don't dare say a word about it to anyone or you'll go to jail. And so what they're saying, Goodlatte and Udall, is we can still stop this.
Yeah, that's good news if we can help them along and encourage them. But the privacy issue is fascinating because sometimes they throw that out like it's separate from everything else. But you can't separate it. That's what liberty is all about. I think I was there the first week, and a bill came up in the committee on banking, and it was to have banking regulations and control. Bank Secrecy Act, Bank Exposure Act. And I remember one person getting up very very polite and condescending a bit. He said, well, Dr. Paul, we know you've only been here a week, but if you're not doing anything bad, you don't have to worry. You know, the privacy issue is irrelevant. And I wonder if they'd accept that if they were thinking that every household is suspected of committing crimes of passion.
Exactly.
We better have a camera on every bedroom.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but no, the privacy issue is so key. It's being undermined, and the FISA issue is on the table right now because we are, like I mentioned yesterday, on the verge of the police state breaking out